Hello and welcome back. Tonight we're doing something a little different in the sense that we're staying firmly in one universe, the universe of Family Guy. But instead of looking at theories or dark readings or anything particularly heavy, we're just going to wander through all the ways this ridiculous cartoon about a fat man in Rhode Island is actually, quietly, obsessively rooted in the real world. Because here's the thing about Family Guy that I find quite fascinating the more I think about it. The show has this reputation for being completely unhinged. Random cutaway gags, non sequiturs, jokes that come from nowhere and go nowhere. And that's true to a degree, but underneath all of that chaos there is a surprisingly dense layer of actual reality. Real places, real people, real history, real events that happened in the actual world and ended up in some form in Quahog. And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff. Everyone knows the show does movie parodies and celebrity cameos. I mean the deeper stuff. The fact that the skyline visible from the Griffin backyard is an accurate render of real buildings in Providence. The fact that the school on the show is named after an actor who really grew up in that part of Rhode Island. The fact that Seth MacFarlane, the person who created the whole thing, missed his own death by about 15 minutes one September morning, and that experience has been sitting quietly in the background of the show's DNA ever since. There's also a version of this that goes beyond individual references. The show itself, its cancellation in 2002, its revival in 2005, is a real story about how audiences find the things they love, how networks misread what they have, and how cultural objects can survive their own apparent endings if the people who care about them care enough. That biography is woven into the show's fabric in ways I'll get to later. I've been thinking about this video for a while, and one of the things that kept surprising me while I was pulling the material together is just how far the real-world thread runs. It's not just a layer or two, it goes all the way through. The geography is real. The creator's biography is real. The real lawsuits are real. The real grief when a cartoon dog died is real. Family Guy has, for over 25 years, been having a continuous conversation with the actual world, and that conversation has occasionally been uncomfortable, and occasionally been remarkable, and occasionally been both at once. So that's what tonight is. We're going to go through all of it. The real geography, the real people, the full episodes that are just other films in a fancy costume, the controversies that crossed from fiction into reality in ways nobody wanted, and the predictions that turned out to be more accurate than anyone was comfortable with. There's a lot to cover, so if you like what I do here and want to support the channel, subscribing is the best way to do that. But for now, settle in, get comfortable, and let's start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. In Providence, Rhode Island, with a young art student who had absolutely no idea what he was about to accidentally build. So before we get into any of the celebrity cameos, or the film parodies, or the stranger corners of this whole rabbit hole, I want to spend some time on something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, which is just how deeply and specifically Rhode Island is baked into this show. Seth MacFarlane was born in Kent, Connecticut in 1973. That part's fairly well known, but the part that actually matters for Family Guy is that he went to art school in Providence, Rhode Island, studying animation at the Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, which is one of the most prestigious art and design schools in the country. He graduated in 1995. And then he made a short film based on the characters he'd been sketching out in his student years, sold it to Fox, and spent the next several years building Quahog, essentially out of his memories of living in that city. And here's what I think is lovely about that. Providence is not a glamorous city. It's not New York, it's not LA, it's a mid-sized New England city with an industrial past and complicated local politics and a lot of very particular charm. It's exactly the kind of place that becomes invisible in American culture, despite being interesting in its own right. And by setting his show there, or near there, or sort of there, MacFarlane quietly made Providence the most referenced city in animated television history. There's something quite nice about that. Now, quahog is a real word, first of all. It refers to a type of hard-shell clam, Latin name Mercenaria mercenaria, that is native to the North Atlantic coast and is a staple of New England seafood culture. Rhode Island in particular is famous for clam chowder and clam bakes and all of that coastal food tradition. So naming the fictional town after a local clam is exactly the kind of insider joke that local viewers would clock immediately, and everyone else would just sort of accept without questioning. Good bit, actually. The show's creator has said in interviews that Quahog is modelled after Cranston, Rhode Island, a suburb southwest of Providence that is, again, not glamorous. It's a working-class area, single-family homes, corner shops, unpretentious in the extreme. Exactly the right setting for a family whose main breadwinner works at a brewery and whose primary social life revolves around a bar called the Drunken Clam. Everything about the show's geography is class consistent in a way that I think is underappreciated. The writer Danny Smith, who was one of the show's executive producers for many years, grew up in Smithfield, Rhode Island, another small Rhode Island town. So you've got the creator and one of his key collaborators, both rooted in this very specific patch of New England, and that shared sense of place runs through the whole show. Now, the Providence skyline. This one I find almost sentimental when I think about it. If you've ever looked at the background of shots set in the Griffin backyard, or really any outdoor quahog scene, you'll notice three particular buildings silhouetted against the sky. Those buildings are real. They're One Financial Plaza, 50 Kennedy Plaza, and the 1927 Bank of America Tower, which locals in Providence call the Superman Building. They call it that because its Art Deco design resembles the Daily Planet building in the old Superman comics and films. It's a 26-story tower with a very distinctive crown, and it's been sitting in the Family Guy background for over 2 decades now. Every time Peter falls off something or Stewie fires a laser in the backyard, the real Providence skyline is right there in the background, like a quietly proud cameo. There's also Spooner Street itself, which is the real name of a real street. MacLeod confirmed in the DVD commentary for When You Wish Upon a Weinstein that he named it after Spooner Hill Road in Canterbury, Connecticut, which is close enough to his actual childhood home that it counts as a real biographical reference. The street the Griffins live on, the most famous fictional address in animated television, is named after a road MacLeod grew up near. And then there's the Big Blue Bug. This is one of my favourite things. On the show, Quahog Pest Control has a giant blue termite on the roof of their building, visible from the street. That's based on a real thing. New England Pest Control in Providence has a 58-foot blue termite named Nibbles Woodaway sitting on top of their building, overlooking Interstate 95. It is an actual Rhode Island landmark. People use it as a navigational reference. The show just took it and stuck it on a fictional building in a fictional town, and most people watching in California, or wherever, probably assumed it was made up. It is very much not made up. Nibbles has been up there since 1980. Buddy Chianchi Junior High School is where most of the main characters went to school in the show's fiction. That name is a very specific joke. Buddy Chianchi, full name Vincent A. Buddy. Chianchi Jr. was the real mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. He served 2 separate tenures as mayor, was extremely popular locally, and was convicted of racketeering and bribery charges in 2002 and spent several years in federal prison. So naming a school after him is, if you're from Rhode Island, an absolutely devastating local joke. It's like naming a fictional school after a specific corrupt politician from your town and waiting to see if anyone notices. The writers noticed, clearly. James Woods Regional High School is where the kids go in later seasons, and that name is doing double duty. James Woods, the actor, who appears as a fictionalized antagonist version of himself across several episodes, more on that later, grew up in Warwick, Rhode Island. Born there, raised there. the school being named after him isn't random celebrity trivia. It's the writers acknowledging that this particular person has an actual geographic connection to the fictional Rhode Island setting of the show, which is a level of care that surprises me every time I think about it. Pawtucket is a real city, directly north of Providence, and it is thoroughly working class in the best possible way. The Pawtucket Patriot Ale that the characters drink at the Drunken Clam is a fictional beer brand, but Pawtucket is very real, and the choice to associate Peter's preferred cheap beer with that specific city, rather than, say, Boston or Providence, is a deliberate class marker. Pawtucket has a long history as an industrial and manufacturing town. It's the kind of place where a man like Peter Griffin would in some sense be spiritually from. Lois's family estate, Cherrywood Manor, is modelled on the Breakers, the Vanderbilt mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. The Breakers was built in 1893 and is one of the most famous examples of Gilded Age excess in the entire country. 70 rooms, built in the Italian Renaissance style, sitting on Cliff Walk overlooking the Atlantic. The show, using it as the template for Carter Pewter Schmidt's family home, is doing a lot of work in a single visual shorthand. It says, "This family is not just rich, they are old money, Newport Mansion, Vanderbilt tier rich." And anyone from Rhode Island who has ever done the Newport Mansion tour, which is quite a lot of people, it's a popular tourist thing, would catch that reference immediately. The Nifty 50s diner, where the Griffins eat periodically, is based on the modern diner in Pawtucket, which was the first diner ever placed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's designed in the shape of a Stirling Streamliner train carriage, one of only 2 Streamliner diners still existing in America. The show didn't invent a generic 1950s diner. They based it on a very specific, historically significant, real-world diner in the same city as the fictional beer. McCoy Stadium in the show mirrors the real McCoy Stadium in Pawtucket, which was home to the minor league baseball team, the Pawtucket Red Sox, the AAA affiliate of the Boston Red Sox for decades before the team relocated. The stadium has since been demolished, which is a shame, but it was a local institution, and its presence in Family Guy is just another layer of that same geographic specificity. The Blackstone Valley Tourism Council actually ran a real-world bus tour of Family Guy Rhode Island locations in 2012. 25 real sites. You could go on this tour and visit the actual places that inspired the fictional Quahog. There was a real map. It was a real tourism event. The fictional town had become real enough to attract real tourists, which is, when you think about it, a pretty remarkable level of geographic embedding for a cartoon about a man who once declared his house a sovereign nation. There are smaller Rhode Island references scattered through the show that reward local knowledge. The Quahog Clam Shack, which appears in various food-related episodes, is consistent with the actual seafood shack culture of the Rhode Island coast. The seasonal spots serving clam chowder and fried clams and lobster rolls along Route 1 and the Newport area. Ocean state references appear periodically. Rhode Island's unofficial state motto, Hope, gets the occasional nod. The show has even referenced the Rhode Island-style hot wieners, a very specific preparation of hot dogs in a steamed bun with a spiced meat sauce, which is as hyper-local a food reference as you can make without needing a footnote. There's also the question of Brown University, which is an Ivy League institution sitting in Providence's College Hill neighborhood, and which casts a particular cultural shadow over the area. The town gown dynamic of Providence, a working-class post-industrial city with an elite university sitting in the middle of it, is something Family Guy touches on in its class dynamics without ever making fully explicit. Peter's disdain for intellectual pretension reads to anyone who knows Providence as something recognizable from that specific civic geography. Roger Williams. Park is a real Providence park, 427 acres, containing a zoo, a museum, and a series of ponds, named after the theologian who founded the Providence settlement in 1636, after being banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for his views on religious liberty. The park has appeared in Family Guy across various episodes as background geography, and its presence quietly connects the show's fictional world to a truly significant piece of American colonial history. Roger Williams' experiment in freedom of conscience was a real historical precedent that the entire American system of religious liberty partly descends from. His park sits a few blocks from where the Griffin family's address would place them on a real Providence map. The fictional and the historically significant share a postcode. And the show also plays periodically with Providence's less wholesome history. The city was a significant organised crime hub in the mid-20th century, dominated for decades by figures in the New England mob. That particular texture, the combination of institutional respectability, working-class culture, and organised criminality in a compact New England city, is something the show draws on occasionally when it wants Quahog to feel like it has real civic weight rather than just being a generic animated background. And I think there's a broader point here worth sitting with for a moment. Family Guy is not set in a generic anytown USA. It is not Springfield, which The Simpsons deliberately keeps vague about its location. Quahog is set in a very specific, lovingly rendered version of a place that the people making it actually knew and lived in. And that specificity gives the show a slightly different texture than other animated sitcoms. The references aren't borrowed, they're earned. The geography is real. The jokes about Pawtucket land differently when Pawtucket is a place that someone writing the joke really remembers. One of the things that has always set Family Guy apart from other animated sitcoms is how it handles celebrity appearances. The approach is almost never famous person shows up and is very nice and helpful. It's more often famous person shows up and is a recognisable heightened version of their own public image, usually doing something questionable. And this works because the show treats celebrity culture with a specific kind of casual brutality. Not malicious, just very clear-eyed about the gap between public persona and whatever might be lurking underneath it. James Woods is probably the most committed example of this, and he's worth dwelling on a bit. The real James Woods is an Oscar-nominated actor born in Vernal, Utah, who grew up in Warwick, Rhode Island. And as we just covered, that Rhode Island connection is why the local high school is named after him in the show's universe. On Family Guy, he plays a fictionalized version of himself across multiple episodes, most memorably as a villain. The show's version of James Woods is vain, obsessive, and can be led anywhere if you leave a trail of candy on the ground. He will follow candy, just follow it right into any situation. There's an episode where Peter literally traps him by dropping pieces of candy one by one. Real James Woods apparently found all of this amusing enough to actually appear on the show. He guest starred and leaned into the joke completely. That combination of actual participation and self-aware willingness to be mocked is exactly the relationship Family Guy seems to prefer with its celebrity subjects. Adam West is a different kind of IRL story, and in some ways, a sweeter one. The real Adam West was the actor who played Batman in the 1966 television series, the campy, deadpan Burt Ward version, and spent much of the decades afterwards being affectionately associated with that role. On Family Guy, he plays Mayor Adam West, who shares his name exactly, and who is played completely straight as an increasingly deranged and beloved local politician. West loved the role. He played it for over 15 years, from early in the show's revival onwards, and was by all accounts really fond of the character. When the real Adam West died in June 2017, the show didn't recast or quietly retire the character. They wrote a tribute episode, Adam West High, in which the town mourns the mayor. It's one of the more quietly affecting moments in the show's history, and it works because West had been a real presence in it for so long that his absence felt real. Carrie Fisher played Angela, Peter's boss at the Pawtucket Brewery, from season 4 onwards, And this is another case where the casting was doing quiet work. Carrie Fisher's real-life personality, brilliant, caustic, deeply funny, absolutely no patience for anything she found stupid, mapped onto the character of Angela with almost eerie precision. Angela is not a soft character. She fires people without much ceremony. She finds Peter exhausting, and she has a bone-dry delivery that Fisher made feel completely effortless. When Fisher died in December 2016, Angela was quietly written off the show the same way West's character was, with a tribute episode in season 17. 2 characters, 2 real deaths, 2 moments where the show had to figure out how to acknowledge real grief within a fundamentally absurd format. And both times it managed it with more grace than you'd expect. Norm Macdonald voiced death, the physical, hooded embodiment of mortality. And if you know anything about Norm Macdonald's comedy, you understand why that's a perfect piece of casting. Macdonald had a relationship with death-adjacent humour throughout his career that was almost philosophical. He found the existential quite funny. His version of Death on Family Guy is weary, patient, occasionally petty. When Macdonald died in 2021, the show recast Death with Adam Carolla, which is a serviceable choice, though one that anyone who loved the original performance will always notice. Robin Leach appeared in Peter, Caviar Eater, which aired in season 2, as the host of a fictional lifestyles of the rich and famous segment about the Griffin's sudden wealth. Robin Leach was the real host of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, the television show that ran throughout the 1980s and became synonymous with a very particular kind of gilded excess. He would breathlessly describe super yachts and champagne and art collections in that unmistakable voice of his. Having Leach show up to narrate Peter's briefly wealthy life is an extremely specific piece of real-world casting that requires you to already know who he is and what that voice means. It's the kind of reference that rewards people of a particular age and will mean nothing to people younger than about 35. The show does not explain the joke. It never explains the jokes. Patrick Stewart appears in one episode as a narrator-type figure, and Stewart being Patrick Stewart, Starfleet captain, theatrical knight of the stage, a voice so authoritative it could narrate the bus schedule and make it sound profound, is the entire joke. The real Stewart's dignified gravitas is imported wholesale into Quahog and then undermined immediately. That's the template. Bryan Cranston appeared in the show around the time Breaking Bad was making him a genuine cultural phenomenon, and again, the joke is the gap between the real person's image and what the show does with it. The show has done this with Robert Downey Jr., with Liam Neeson, with Dwayne Johnson, with essentially anyone sufficiently famous that their name alone carries a meaning the show can play against. Elon Musk appeared as himself in a later season episode at a point when Musk had become sufficiently famous, or sufficiently strange, that including him in a Family Guy cutaway needed no particular setup. He was simply a figure the culture had made so legible that a brief exaggerated version of him could appear in Quahog and be immediately understood. Whether that's flattering to Musk is somewhat debatable. The Michael Jackson situation deserves its own moment because it is properly peculiar. In the season 2 episode, Peter's Got a Brand New Bag, a character appears, a large man, gentle and quietly strange, who describes himself as a fan of pop music, voiced by someone credited in the actual broadcast as John Smith. The voice sounds exactly like Michael Jackson. The singing sounds exactly like Michael Jackson. The character behaves in ways that rhyme with the public image of Michael Jackson at that particular cultural moment. Years after the episode aired, it was widely reported and generally accepted that this was actually Michael Jackson, who had reportedly approached the show wanting to appear without being officially credited. He wanted to be there without it being a formal celebrity cameo. Whether that's charming eccentricity or something more complicated probably depends on how you feel about Michael Jackson in general. The show never officially confirmed it. The credits just say John Smith. Drew Barrymore played Brian's girlfriend Gillian across multiple episodes, and this is a different kind of guest casting than the villain version celebrity appearances. Gillian is not a version of Drew Barrymore. She's a fully fictional character who happens to be voiced by her. But Barrymore's real-world image at the time, warm, slightly offbeat, associated with a kind of gentle, slightly vague charm, mapped well enough onto Gillian that the casting felt like it was doing quiet character work. The show's choice of voice actors for significant recurring roles tends not to be arbitrary. There's usually a texture match between the celebrity's public persona and the character's personality, even when the character has nothing to do with the celebrity's own life. Betty White appeared in an episode at a point when White had become, through a combination of genuine longevity and a late career cultural renaissance, one of the most universally beloved figures in American entertainment. The meta joke of having Betty White, sweet, sharp, apparently ageless Betty White, do something completely inappropriate in Quahog is the same structure as all the other celebrity subversions, but it works particularly well with her because the gap between her public image and any possible misbehaviour is so large. Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds both appear in later seasons in the mode of very famous person playing a slightly heightened version of their established persona. Ferrell's persona, loud, physically committed, somewhat oblivious, deeply confident in his own instincts, is so well established at this point that inserting him into Quahog requires minimal setup. Reynolds' cultivated irony and meta-awareness of his own celebrity similarly port cleanly into the show's register. Both of them demonstrate something interesting, that the show's model of celebrity engagement gets easier as cultural figures become more self-aware about their own image. When a celebrity is already performing a slightly ironic version of themselves in their own work, as Reynolds particularly does, there's less gap for Family Guy to exploit. The parody and the person have already converged, and I want to spend a moment on the question of why real celebrities agree to this, because many of them are appearing as unflattering versions of themselves, participating in jokes at their own expense, and often not being compensated in any way that approaches what their usual fees would be. James Woods showed up to be mocked as a candy trail following villain. The TNG cast showed up to be kidnapped by a cartoon baby. Patrick Stewart showed up to lend his magnificent voice to something designed to deflate his magnificence. There's something about Family Guy specifically that seems to attract celebrities who are either very comfortable with irreverence or who find something really appealing about the format. My theory, and it's just a theory, is that Family Guy offers a particular kind of cultural validation that is different from appearing in a serious film or a prestige television drama. When Family Guy parodies you, it's acknowledging that you're sufficiently embedded in the cultural vocabulary that you can be used as a shorthand. It's saying, this person is real enough in the public consciousness that we can import them directly into our absurd universe, and the audience will know exactly who they are. That's its own kind of status. Being mocked by Family Guy means you've arrived at a level of cultural legibility where your name alone does work. Not everyone gets to that level. The ones who do seem to understand the compliment underneath the joke. There's also a generational dimension to this that's easy to overlook. The celebrities who appear in Family Guy across different eras reflect the cultural figures who were dominant when the writers of those particular seasons were forming their cultural identities. Early seasons reach for Robin Leach and Billy Ocean and Kathy Ireland, figures from the 1980s, the childhood years of the show's original writing staff. Later seasons reach for figures who were prominent in the 1990s and 2000s. Still later seasons incorporate celebrities whose primary fame is recent enough that they might not register at all for someone watching with even a few years remove from peak cultural saturation. The show is, in this sense, a continuous, generational self-portrait, always drawing on whoever was famous when the people making it were growing up and paying attention. And then there's the Star Trek, the Next Generation reunion in Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, Season 7, where Stewie kidnaps the entire original TNG cast to attend a science fiction convention. Patrick Stewart, Brent Spiner, LeVar Burton, Jonathan Frakes, Marina Sirtis, Michael Dorn, Gates McFadden all appear, all voicing themselves. They are presented as real people who exist in the Quahog universe, who have real feelings about being kidnapped by a baby. It's one of those moments where the show's commitment to using actual celebrities, rather than sound-alikes or thinly veiled versions, creates something that would be really impossible in most other formats. And all of this, the Woods villain arc, the West tribute, the Fisher farewell, the Jackson mystery, adds up to a show that has a more complex relationship with real celebrity than almost anything else on television. The celebrities aren't just borrowed for brand recognition. They're incorporated, sometimes for years, sometimes until they die, into the texture of a fictional world. Quahog absorbs them. And occasionally, when something happens to them in the real world, Quahog has to figure out how to process that. Since we're on the topic of the show's relationship with reality, let's talk about how it handles actual history. Because Family Guy has, over its run, visited an astonishing range of real historical periods and events, sometimes for a single cutaway gag, sometimes for an entire episode, occasionally with a level of care and specificity that is really surprising, given that the same show once did a 30-second bit about a man getting hit in the face repeatedly for no reason. The show's approach to history is not reverent. It is not a History Channel documentary, but it's also not purely dismissive. It tends to engage with historical events in ways that assume the audience already knows what's being referenced, which means the show is constantly betting that its viewers have a basic working knowledge of, say, the Salem witch trials or the founding of American colonial settlements. Sometimes that bet is justified. Sometimes it probably isn't, but the references are almost always real. Let's start with Peter's Progress, which is a Season 7 episode where Peter discovers through a palm reading that he is the reincarnation of Griffin Peterson, the founder of Quahog, who lived in 17th century England. The episode goes back to the colonial period, specifically to a version of England under King Stewart III, who is a stand-in for the Stuart monarchs who ruled Britain in the 1600s. The Stuarts were real. Charles I, Charles II, James I, and II. The period depicted in the episode, English colonial expansion, the establishment of American settlements, the export of the poor and the criminal and the merely inconvenient to the New World, is real history. The show dresses it in the show's usual chaos, but the scaffold is genuine. Griffin Peterson is exiled to America and ends up founding Quahog, which is a riff on a genuine pattern in American colonial history. Many early settlements in New England were founded by people who were either fleeing religious persecution in England, exiled for political reasons, or simply seeking land that wasn't already spoken for in an increasingly crowded English countryside. The Puritan colonies of Massachusetts, the Rhode Island settlement founded by Roger Williams after he was expelled from Massachusetts for his religious views. These are real events that the show is, in its oblique way, nodding at. Then there are the Nate Griffin storylines, which appear in the episode Untitled Griffin Family History. Peter's ancestor Nate Griffin is depicted in antebellum America, and the episode engages directly with the history of slavery in the United States. The show doesn't shy away from the reality of what it's depicting. It uses real historical structures, the slave trade, the plantation system, the specific inhumanity of that period as its setting. And within that setting, it makes several very specific, real-world references. The O.J. Simpson white Bronco chase from 1994 appears as a callback, which is the show's signature anachronistic joke, inserting something from contemporary pop culture into a historical setting. But the underlying history it's placed against is real, and it's treated with more seriousness than you might expect. There's also a reference in that episode to Richard Bachman, the pen name that horror novelist Stephen King used early in his career. Peter's ancestor's real name is revealed to be Richard Bachman, a deep-cut reference that rewards anyone who knows their Stephen King publication history. Bachman was the name King used to publish books like The Running Man and Thinner in the late 1970s and early 1980s, partly because his publisher felt he was releasing books too quickly under his own name. It's an extremely specific literary reference to drop into a slavery narrative, which is exactly the kind of tonal whiplash the show runs on. The Road to Germany episode, which aired in Season 7, is one of the more really historically engaged things the show ever produced. Brian and Mort Goldman, a Jewish character based in part on the particular nervousness of mid-century American Jewish identity, are accidentally transported back to Warsaw in 1939, right as the Nazi invasion is beginning. The episode depicts the actual Nazi occupation of Poland, the Warsaw Ghetto, the fear and violence of that historical moment. It also does this while maintaining the show's formal structure. There are still jokes, there is still Stewie being Stewie, but it treats the history with an unusual amount of care. The setting isn't just an excuse for historical comedy. It's used to put a character into genuine danger based on his real-world identity. The episode ends with what is essentially a real history lesson about the horrors of the Nazi occupation, wrapped in an animated sitcom frame. I think it works because the show commits to both things simultaneously. It doesn't apologize for the jokes, and it doesn't soften the history. Family Guy through the years is a whole different kind of historical engagement. That episode takes the Griffin family through multiple real decades, 1969, 1973, and others. And the show's researchers clearly spent time getting the cultural details right. The 1969 segment is done in the visual style of The Archie Show, which was a real Saturday morning cartoon from that era. Meg's outfit is a direct homage to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album cover, which came out in 1967 and remained a cultural touchstone well into the early 70s. Quagmire quotes the opening line of For What It's Worth by Buffalo Springfield. There's something happening here, which is a real 1966 protest song associated with the counterculture movement. The 1973 segment evokes the gritty urban aesthetic of shows like Welcome Back, Kotter. And then there's John McCain. His imprisonment and torture by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War is referenced in that same episode. The episode title alone, and the specific references it makes to political figures who are actually imprisoned, puts real history on the table in a way that the show handles carefully. John McCain was a real person who survived 5.5 years in a North Vietnamese prison camp and came back and spent decades in American politics. Using him as a reference point in a family sitcom requires a level of real-world knowledge from the audience that the show consistently assumed it had. US presidents have been depicted across the entire run of the show. Washington appears in period-appropriate settings. Lincoln is used in various Civil War-era gags. Nixon's I am not a crook moment from his 1973 press conference, one of the most quoted phrases in American political history, has been referenced multiple times in different contexts. Reagan, both Bushes, Clinton, Obama, Trump, every sitting president since the show began in 1999 has appeared in some form. The Clinton appearances are almost always adjacent to the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which was real, and which the show covered in real time during its first season, since the scandal broke in 1998, just before the show premiered. That's how embedded in real political history Family Guy was from its very beginning. And Dick Cheney's actual hunting accident is worth its own moment because the timing of the reference is so precise. The real event happened on February 11th, 2006. Dick Cheney, the Vice President of the United States, was quail hunting in Texas when he accidentally shot his friend and Republican fundraiser Harry Whittington in the face with a 28-gauge shotgun. Whittington survived and, in one of the stranger public moments of that decade, apologised to Cheney at a press conference for the trouble the shooting had caused. The Family Guy episode, Meet the Quagmires, aired in May 2006, 3 months after the incident. In it, Death tells Peter that Dick Cheney has shot and killed Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. It was a joke. In 2016, Antonin Scalia died. Not shot by anyone. He died in his sleep of apparent heart failure. But the specific pairing of Cheney and Scalia in that death scenario turned out to be retrospectively memorable. The Salem witch trials appear in various episodes as a historical setting. The Prohibition era is visited. The Revolutionary War is referenced across multiple cutaways. The Civil War comes up repeatedly in relation to the Nate Griffin material and in standalone gags. What you end up with, if you take it all together, is something that functions almost as an erratic, very poorly indexed American history textbook. Nothing in order, nothing presented with academic rigour, but almost everything grounded in something that actually happened. The Reagan references deserve a brief pause because they appear throughout the show in ways that reflect a particular generational relationship with his presidency. Reagan served from 1981 to 1989, the full span of the decade that Family Guy's core writers grew up in. He is never just a historical figure in the show's frame. He's the president of their childhoods, the backdrop against which American popular culture in the 1980s played out. The jokes about Reagan are rarely pure satire. There's usually an ambivalence in them, the complicated feeling of a generation that was told one story about that era and has since developed a more nuanced relationship with what it actually was. Reagan's presence in cutaway gags tends to be tinged with something like nostalgic irony rather than outright hostility. The show's treatment of the Vietnam War runs through it in ways both direct and indirect. The direct references include the Family Guy Through the Years historical episode and its careful attention to the late 1960s, the anti-war movement, the counterculture, the draft, the very specific mood of 1969 America. The indirect references are structural. Quagmire's naval background, Joe Swanson's backstory as a disabled veteran-adjacent figure in a community where injury and service are part of the landscape. The show grew up in the long shadow of Vietnam, as most American culture did for the latter half of the 20th century, and it reflects that shadow even when it isn't directly invoking the war. And the civil rights movement appears across various episodes, handled with fluctuating care. The Nate Griffin material engages directly with slavery and its aftermath. Cutaway gags reference specific civil rights figures and events. The show's treatment of race more broadly is one of its most hotly contested areas. It has been simultaneously criticised for perpetuating stereotypes and credited with satirising them, sometimes in the same episode. It's one of those areas where the show's intentions and its effects are genuinely difficult to separate, and smart people disagree about whether Family Guy has done more to challenge or reinforce certain attitudes. I don't think there's a clean answer. The history it's engaging with is real enough that the stakes of the engagement matter. The Cold War and the space race are another real historical layer that runs through the show in various cutaway contexts. The specific cultural anxiety of the Cold War era, the duck and cover drills, the bomb shelters, the particular flavour of 1950s American nationalism and its accompanying paranoia gets referenced periodically, usually through the lens of nostalgia comedy. NASA and the Apollo program appear as cultural reference points. The moon landing of 1969 is treated as a genuine shared cultural memory. These references locate the show in a specific strand of American historical consciousness that takes the mid-20th century, the post-war boom, the Cold War, the space race, the Kennedy era, as a kind of mythologized national foundation that is both celebrated and interrogated. The show grew up, culturally, in a country still processing those decades. That processing happens in the jokes. And there's one more historical reference I want to mention before we move on, and it's one the show handles quietly rather than loudly. Peter's job is at the Pawtucket Brewery. He's a safety inspector. He's a blue-collar worker in a manufacturing industry in a post-industrial New England city at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st. That's a real historical situation. The deindustrialization of New England, the decline of manufacturing jobs, the specific economic anxiety of working-class white men in former mill towns. That's the real-world context that Peter Griffin exists in, even if the show mostly uses it as a backdrop for gags about his incompetence rather than social commentary. The history is there. It's just usually buried under a cutaway. Now let's talk about the full episode parodies, because this is a separate thing from cutaway references and historical gags. This is the show committing an entire 22-minute episode, sometimes longer, to recreating a specific real film or television property in the Family Guy universe. And these aren't lazy retreads. The better ones are quite detailed, requiring actual knowledge of the source material to follow the jokes. Some of them are licensed, some of them are clearly not licensed, but exist in the comfortable grey zone of parody law. All of them tell you something interesting about what the show values and what it thinks its audience knows. The Star Wars trilogy is the clearest example, and also the most formally significant because it was done with the official blessing of Lucasfilm. Blue Harvest aired in 2007 as an hour-long special and covered Star Wars: A New Hope, with Peter as Han Solo, Chris as Luke Skywalker, Stewie as Darth Vader, Brian as Chewbacca, Herbert the Old Man as Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Cleveland as R2-D2. Something Darkside covered The Empire Strikes Back in 2009. It's a Trap covered Return of the Jedi in 2010. Together these were released on DVD as the Laugh It Up Fuzzball collection. The name Blue Harvest is its own real-world reference. It was the fake production title that George Lucas used on the set of Return of the Jedi to keep fans and journalists away. The crew wore Blue Harvest t-shirts. The production documents said Blue Harvest. The whole thing was a deliberate misdirection. So Family Guy naming its Star Wars parody after Lucasfilm's own security fiction is a layer of self-awareness that rewards real film history knowledge. The Lucasfilm licensing agreement matters here because it means this wasn't guerrilla parody. It was officially sanctioned recreation. Family Guy didn't have to guess or approximate. They had access, and the resulting episodes are really faithful to the originals in their structure and visual approach, which makes the inserted jokes, which are very much Family Guy jokes, non sequitur and irreverent, and frequently nothing to do with Star Wars at all, land harder against the faithful background. Blue Harvest won a Saturn Award for Best Presentation in 2008. A Saturn Award is a real award given by the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy and Horror Films. Family Guy won it for a Star Wars parody, which is a sentence that still surprises me. Then there's the Shawshank Redemption episode. The Shawshank Redemption is a 1994 drama based on a Stephen King novella, directed by Frank Darabont, and it has for years sat at or near the top of IMDb's all-time ratings chart. It's one of those films that achieved massive cultural penetration, not through box office performance, but through home video and cable television. Everyone has seen it. Family Guy leverages exactly that ubiquity. The episode maps the main characters onto the film's roles. Peter as Andy Dufresne, Cleveland as Red, and plays the plot largely straight before inserting its own absurdities. The famous opera scene, where Andy plays music across the prison PA system, becomes a bit about Peter playing Hollaback Girl by Gwen Stefani over the whole prison to universal confusion. The poster hiding the escape tunnel. In the film, it's a Rita Hayworth poster. Then a Marilyn Monroe poster becomes a David Cassidy poster. Small, specific substitutions that only work if you already know exactly what they're replacing. High School English takes the Griffin family into the plots of actual literary classics. The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1925 novel about the American dream and its discontents, and of Mice and Men, John Steinbeck's 1937 novella about two migrant workers in Depression-era California, both get the Family Guy treatment. This is a show doing literary parody, which puts it in a different category than film parody. The Great Gatsby is on a lot of high school reading lists. Of Mice and Men is on even more. By choosing these specific texts, the show is again making a bet about what its audience knows. And to be fair, they're probably safe bets. Most people who watch Family Guy have sat through a high school English class, and most high school English classes have encountered at least one of these. The Dropout parody in season 21 is a more recent example of the show doing real-world event recreation, and it's particularly pointed because it's based on a real fraud story rather than a fictional film. Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, the Silicon Valley health tech company that Holmes founded on the promise of revolutionary blood testing technology, which turned out not to work, was a massive real scandal that culminated in Holmes being convicted of fraud in 2022. The Family Guy episode parodies the Hulu documentary drama The Dropout, with Lois playing Holmes and Peter playing Sunny Balwani, Holmes' business partner and ex-boyfriend. The show is parodying a dramatization of a real fraud, which is its own interesting layer of remove, not the history directly, but the television version of the history, which had itself already become a cultural object. The Bear parody in the same season is different again. The Bear is an FX drama about the restaurant industry in Chicago, and at the time Family Guy parodied it. It was a prestige television show with a very specific kind of cultural cachet, the type of show that people who care about television care about very loudly. The joke in the Family Guy version is that only Chris has actually seen the bear, so the rest of the characters don't understand the parody they're supposed to be performing, which is a meta joke about the nature of parody itself. You can only parody something if you and your audience share the reference. If one person in the room has seen it and 5 haven't, the parody collapses. The episode is about that collapse. The Top Gun Maverick parody in season 23 follows the usual template. Peter as Maverick, the rest of the cast in supporting roles, but it's interesting for its timing. Top Gun Maverick was released in 2022 and became one of the highest-grossing films of the year, a genuine cultural event for a generation that remembered the original 1986 film and a new audience that came to it fresh. Family Guy doing a Maverick parody is the show doing what it's always done, taking the biggest cultural object of the moment and putting it in the Quahog blender. The It's a Wonderful Life Christmas episodes reference the 1946 Frank Capra film periodically, as does almost every piece of English-language television that does a Christmas special. But Family Guy's version is specific enough. The angel Clarence the alternate world reveals, the specific emotional logic of showing someone what the world would look like without them, that it functions as genuine engagement with the source material rather than just generic Christmas movie energy. And the Sound of Music parodies, and the Grease parodies, and the various episodes that are structured as genre exercises, the murder mystery episode, the thriller, the romantic comedy, each one borrowing not just a plot, but a whole visual and tonal grammar from real films that the show's audience would recognise. What I find most interesting about all of this, taken together, is the implicit argument the show is making about culture. Every time Family Guy devotes an entire episode to recreating a specific film or literary work, it's saying, this thing is so embedded in our shared cultural vocabulary that we can rebuild it in our format and you'll still know exactly what it is. It's a vote of confidence in the audience's collective memory. The show is essentially saying, I trust you to know The Shawshank Redemption without me explaining what The Shawshank Redemption is. I trust you to know Star Wars. I trust you to know The Great Gatsby. Sometimes that bet pays off beautifully. Sometimes, particularly with more recent or more niche references, it doesn't. but the bet is always being made, and the source material is always real. Now, the Grease parodies deserve a mention because Grease, the 1971 Broadway musical and 1978 John Travolta film, is one of those cultural objects that has achieved such complete saturation in American popular consciousness that it functions almost as a shared language. Every American over roughly the age of 35 has seen Grease, probably multiple times. They know the songs, they know the costumes, they know the specific late 1950s teenage romantic drama aesthetic. Family Guy can drop into that aesthetic for 30 seconds in a cutaway, play a few bars of Summer Nights or Greased Lightning, and the entire context is immediately established without any explanation at all. It's one of the most efficient pop culture communication tools the show has, a cultural shorthand that requires almost zero setup. The Sound of Music is in a similar category. The 1965 film, based on the 1959 Rodgers and Hammerstein stage musical, which is itself based on the real story of the Von Trapp family singers who escaped Nazi-occupied Austria, is another one of those pieces of real-world culture that has been absorbed so thoroughly into the cultural vocabulary that it can be referenced in pieces. You don't even need the whole thing. Do Re Mi is enough. The image of Julie Andrews spinning on a hillside is enough. The show can use a fragment and the audience fills in everything else. That economy of reference is something Family Guy deploys constantly, and it only works because the source material is really shared across generations. The It's a Wonderful Life format gets used periodically in Christmas episodes, and it's worth noting how specific the borrowing is. The 1946 Frank Capra film has such a precise emotional logic. A man is shown what the world would look like without him, discovers he was valuable all along, recommits to his life with renewed gratitude. That any animated sitcom doing a Christmas special is essentially in dialogue with it, whether they acknowledge it or not. Family Guy's versions of this format are usually inversions. The world is revealed to be either identical or arguably better without the main character, which is a joke about the gap between the film's sentimental premise and the show's more abrasive view of its own protagonist. But the source material is always legibly present in the background. The murder mystery format in And Then There Were Fewer borrows from a tradition that runs through Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, 1939. 10 people on an isolated island, a murderer among them, and the broader whodunit genre that Christie more or less invented in its modern form. Christie's book was published as 10 Little Indians in some markets and has a complicated publishing history around its title. The Family Guy episode is structurally a Christie-style closed-room mystery with a locked-in set of suspects, a series of deaths, and a final revelation. It's the show doing genre fiction, and the genre it's doing is very specifically real. Christie's contribution to detective fiction is one of the most reproduced structural templates in 20th century popular literature. Inside Family Guy, the mockumentary episode, is borrowing from a real contemporary genre that had been popularised by The Office, the UK version premiered 2001, the US version 2005, and Parks and Recreation 2009. The mockumentary format, cameras visible, characters addressing them directly, interview segments cutting away from the action, had become, by the time Family Guy deployed it, sufficiently mainstream that the parody of the format was itself a reference to a real television genre that millions of viewers would recognise instantly. The one I want to end this section with is Brian and Stewie from Season 8, which aired commercial-free in May 2010. It's not a parody of anything specific. It's the show doing something really unusual, an episode entirely devoid of cutaway gags with only 2 characters, set entirely in a locked bank vault. No musical cues, no supporting cast, just a conversation. It references almost nothing external. It's pure character. And in the context of everything else the show does, all the parody and pop culture machinery, it stands out precisely because it refuses to use any of the show's usual real-world furniture. It's the show at its most formally stripped, and it's one of the best episodes in the whole run. No notes. And now, let's talk about the cutaway gag. Because everything we've discussed so far, the real geography, the real celebrities, the real history, the real film parodies, is the visible architecture of the show's relationship with the real world. But the cutaway gag is the engine underneath all of it. It's where the real-world references live in their most compressed and abundant form. And if you were to take a transcript of Family Guy across all 24 seasons and just catalogue every cutaway, you'd end up with something that functions as a properly strange and comprehensive survey of American popular culture from roughly 1950 to the present. The cutaway gag works like this. A character says something. "This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me." Or, "This is harder than that time I..." And the show cuts away to a brief, self-contained scene that illustrates, or contradicts, or obliquely responds to that statement. The scene usually lasts between 5 seconds and a minute. It often has nothing to do with the episode's plot. It returns to the main story as if nothing happened. This format was not invented by Family Guy. Variety shows and sketch comedy had used similar structures for decades. But Family Guy popularized it as a sustained sitcom technique to a degree that permanently altered how animated comedy worked. And almost every single cutaway references something real. That's the key thing. They're not invented absurdity. They're usually grounded in a real pop culture object, a real film, a real TV show, a real person, a real event, a real song, and the joke is the collision between that real thing and the Griffin family's world. The show's primary demographic in its first decade was people who had grown up in the late 1970s and 1980s. And this is crucial because it explains why so many of the cutaways target that very specific cultural era. The 80s is the show's richest vein. If you were born between about 1968 and 1978, Family Guy is, among other things, an elaborate love letter to your childhood television diet. It references everything. Happy Days, Different Strokes, The Brady Bunch, Fame, Knight Rider, Magnum P.I., The A-Team. These aren't random selections. They're the specific shows that were on American television during the childhood years of the people writing Family Guy. The Fonzarelli religion episode in Season 2 is worth stopping on. Peter starts a new religion based on Arthur Fonzarelli, Fonzie, the leather jacket-wearing, motorcycle-riding character from Happy Days, which aired on ABC from 1974 to 1984. Fonzie was one of the defining pop culture figures of that era. Cool, slightly dangerous, deeply sentimental underneath the pose. The show ran for 11 seasons and made Henry Winkler a genuine cultural icon. The fact that Peter would choose to base a religion on Fonzie rather than, say, any actual religious figure tells you a lot about the show's view of American pop culture as a substitute religion. And it only works if you know who Fonzie is. If you don't know Happy Days, this is just a show about a man worshipping a fictional person. If you do know Happy Days, it's a joke about a specific kind of 70s nostalgia that was itself already deeply embedded in American culture. And then there's She-Poopy. In Season 5, during the episode Peter's Two Dads, Peter scores a touchdown during a football game and celebrates by performing She-Poopy, a real song from the real 1957 Broadway musical The Music Man, with music and lyrics by Meredith Willson. The Music Man is about a con man who comes to a small Iowa town in 1912, pretending to be a band teacher. She-Poopy is a cheerful nonsense song performed in the second act. It is not a particularly well-known song in 2007 when this episode airs. It was well known in its own era and has a certain nostalgic presence in American culture, but you would not expect it to appear in a Fox animated sitcom. The show performs it full, complete choreography. Peter leads the entire stadium in the number. It's one of the show's best musical moments, and it works because it treats the source material with absolute sincerity. There is no irony in the performance of She-Poopy. They just do it. And that commitment is what makes it funny. The musical numbers are a recurring real-world reference category all their own. You Have AIDS, which appears in Season 4 and is performed in the style of a cheerful barbershop quartet delivering terrible news, is a parody of a specific register of 1970s soft rock charity ballad. The particular tone it's targeting, gentle, harmonically pleasant, emotionally earnest, is very real and very recognizable. The joke is the application of that register to devastating medical news. But the register itself is the real-world reference. It's targeting something specific about how a particular genre of popular music expressed care and concern. Prom Night Dumpster Baby is a parody of show tune-style optimism, the kind of relentless cheerfulness that early Sondheim or late Bernstein deployed. The show used these musical parodies to do something interesting. By mapping the formal conventions of real musical genres onto completely inappropriate content, they made the musical conventions themselves visible in a way they usually aren't. When something is done in the right style, you stop noticing the style. When it's done in the right style but applied to something completely wrong, the style suddenly becomes the subject. Michael Jackson's Ben appears in one episode as a reference that doubles as an in-joke. Ben is a real 1972 song that Michael Jackson recorded at age 14, a tender ballad addressed to a rat. The song is real. The fact that it's addressed to a rat is real. The show using it as a reference to something being addressed to something inappropriate is a very specific real-world citation. Billy Ocean's Suddenly plays while Peter falls in love with a cardboard cutout of Kathy Ireland. Both of these things are real. Suddenly is a real 1985 single from the Trinidadian British singer Billy Ocean, and it was used extensively in 1980s romantic films and television. Kathy Ireland was a real Sports Illustrated supermodel whose poster was ubiquitous in the 1980s and early 1990s, particularly in the bedrooms of teenage boys. The joke requires you to know both of these things. It assumes that the phrase Kathy Ireland cutout and the opening notes of Suddenly will produce an immediate response of recognition in the viewer, and for a certain generation, it absolutely does. The Tonya Harding honeymoon video is referenced in an early Season 1 episode, and this one's worth a note because the real-world context is very specific. Tonya Harding was a figure skater who became notorious in 1994 when her ex-husband arranged an attack on her rival Nancy Kerrigan before the Winter Olympics. Harding claimed limited knowledge of the attack. The controversy became one of the great tabloid stories of that decade. Her honeymoon sex tape, which Harding reportedly sold to a distributor after it was leaked without her consent, in a complicated legal and personal situation, became a major tabloid story on top of an already massive tabloid story. Joe Swanson mentioning the Tonya Harding honeymoon video in Season 1, 1999, is the show reaching directly into very recent, real-world tabloid history and using it as casual characterization. It expects you to know who Tonya Harding is and what the tape means. The audience at that moment absolutely would have known. Brian being an actual contestant on The Bachelorette is Season 4 material, and what makes it interesting is that The Bachelorette is a real show, not just a type of show, the actual programme, which had recently premiered on ABC. Brian going on The Bachelorette is the show putting one of its main characters into an existing real television format, which is a different kind of engagement than parodying a finished film. It acknowledges that The Bachelorette is a present-tense cultural phenomenon, not a historical artifact. The New England Patriots deserve their own paragraph. Peter's obsessive fandom of the Patriots is not incidental local colour. The Patriots are a real NFL team based in the Boston area, and their run from the early 2000s through roughly 2020 was one of the most sustained periods of dominance in professional football history. 6 Super Bowl championships under head coach Bill Belichick and quarterback Tom Brady. That dynasty was occurring in real time throughout much of Family Guy's run. Tom Brady appears in the show. Bill Belichick has been referenced. The episode 3 Acts of God involves the gang literally traveling to heaven to ask God to stop helping opposing teams beat the Patriots, which is a very specific kind of Boston area football fan complaint expressed in the most absurd possible format. The technology layer tracks each era too, more on that in a moment. There's also a category of real-world reference that the show uses less ostentatiously, but with great consistency, which is real news and current events. The show is written and produced on a cycle that means new episodes respond to things that happened in the world roughly 6 to 8 months before air date. The news events that were dominating coverage in the room when a given episode was written tend to surface in the gags, sometimes directly and sometimes as a kind of ambient texture. Episodes from election years feel slightly different from episodes in off years. Episodes produced during major news cycles, wars, scandals, disasters, trials, carry traces of the cultural weather they were made in. It's a form of real-world documentation that isn't usually what people discuss when they discuss Family Guy, but it's there in every season. The show's relationship with advertising and consumerism is also a real-world reference layer that runs quietly through everything. The brands that characters interact with, the products they buy and use and aspire to, are either real brands or very thinly veiled versions of them. Peter's beer preferences, the snacks in the Griffin kitchen, the cars that characters drive, the television programs playing on the TV in the background. All of these are real-world commercial signals embedded in the fiction and taken together across hundreds of episodes. They constitute a surprisingly detailed portrait of American consumer culture at the turn of the 21st century. Archaeologists and cultural historians working in 100 years will have a very clear picture of what Americans were buying and watching and eating and aspiring to between 1999 and the present, if they sit down with the Family Guy archive and pay attention. The Kiss appearance, the actual band in full makeup as themselves, is the kind of celebrity band as cultural monument casting that the show does periodically. Kiss has been maintaining the same visual identity since 1973. The face paint, the platform boots, the pyrotechnics, the very specific iconography of Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, and whoever else is in the band at any given moment. They have become their own historical artifact, a real band preserved in amber, as a perpetual reference to a particular era of hard rock. Having them show up in Quahog is the show acknowledging that they are less a band and more a cultural symbol. At this point, almost a logo. Since we're on the topic of music, it's worth noting how thoroughly the show mines real film scores and television themes. The Indiana Jones theme plays when Stewie goes on an adventure. The Back to the Future theme plays during a time travel sequence. The Star Wars Imperial March underscores any remotely militaristic situation. The Jaws theme plays anytime something approaches underwater. The show uses these as emotional shorthand, cultural Pavlovian triggers, and the audience responds to them exactly as the filmmakers of those original scores intended, except now the response has been grafted onto a cartoon about a dysfunctional family in Rhode Island. The real emotional weight of John Williams' music gets borrowed and slightly deflated, and it's funny precisely because the original music was so earnest and so good. The Brady Bunch is referenced with notable frequency, and it's worth dwelling on why. The Brady Bunch ran from 1969 to 1974 and depicted an idealized blended family in suburban California, cheerful, well-adjusted, only mildly troubled by the relatively gentle problems of a 1970s TV sitcom. The show became a kind of cultural artifact of American optimism about the family as an institution, a rose-tinted image of what domestic life could look like. Family Guy is, in some sense, the anti-Brady Bunch, a show explicitly about the dysfunction, resentment, and low-grade catastrophe of actual family life. So when Family Guy references the Brady Bunch, it's always doing something structural. invoking the ideal to make the reality funnier by contrast. The joke is the gap. You need to know what the Brady Bunch was promising in order to appreciate how thoroughly Quahog fails to deliver it. And then there's the 1990s layer, which I want to give a moment to because it's sometimes overshadowed by the show's very heavy 1980s presence. The 1990s produced its own dense stratum of cultural references in Family Guy. Nirvana and grunge, the rise of the internet, the specific cultural texture of early Bill Clinton America, the peak of certain comedy formats that Family Guy later borrowed from and reacted against. The various sketch comedy shows of the early 90s, In Living Colour, The Kids in the Hall, Mr. Show, represent a comedy tradition that overlaps in interesting ways with the Family Guy sensibility. The show came of age, in a sense, during that decade, and the references to it reflect a kind of cultural intimacy with that era's particular energy. Seinfeld, which ran from 1989 to 1998 and is regularly cited as one of the most influential sitcoms in American television history, appears across various Family Guy references in ways that acknowledge its structural influence. Seinfeld perfected the multi-plot episode format, several separate storylines running simultaneously and converging in the finale, and Family Guy's own episode structure owes something to that legacy. The show rarely acknowledges this directly, but it's there in the DNA. The 1990s pop music stratum is also present. Songs by artists like Hootie and the Blowfish, Alanis Morissette, the Backstreet Boys, and NSYNC appear in cutaway contexts, deployed as precise temporal markers for a specific cultural moment. If you were in your 20s in 1997, hearing or you ought to know in a Family Guy gag doesn't just trigger recognition, it triggers a whole atmosphere, a whole period, a whole version of what the world felt like. The show knows this and uses it deliberately. The choice of which 1990s song to use in which context is never accidental. It's always picking the song that most precisely evokes the specific emotional temperature of a particular moment in that decade. All in the Family, which ran from 1971 to 1979, is another key reference point. Archie Bunker, Carol O'Connor's bigoted, loud, working-class protagonist, is one of the templates for Peter Griffin, and the show has acknowledged this various ways. Archie Bunker was the first major American television character who was explicitly portrayed as holding prejudiced views that the show treated with a mixture of affection and critique. The audience was supposed to both laugh at Archie and recognise that his views were wrong. Norman Lear, who created All in the Family, was doing something formally adventurous for 1971 network television. Family Guy inherits that tradition of the lovable but flawed patriarch, pushes it significantly further in the direction of outright incompetence, and occasionally reflects on that lineage directly. MASH, the CBS drama that ran from 1972 to 1983 and depicted a mobile army surgical hospital during the Korean War, represents a slightly different kind of real-world reference category. MASH is one of the most watched single episodes of American television in history. Its finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, aired in February 1983 and was watched by over 106 million people, a record that stood for decades. The show itself was an anti-war statement dressed as a comedy, and it's referenced in Family Guy primarily as a cultural touchstone, rather than as something to be parodied. When MASH comes up, it's usually a signal that the show is trying to evoke a particular kind of 1970s and early 1980s cultural authority. And the technology references that mark each era of the show deserve more attention than they usually get as a form of real-world documentation. Family Guy has been running continuously since 1999, which means it has documented, in cartoon form, the transition from a world where mobile phones were rare and expensive luxury items to a world where everyone carries a powerful networked computer in their pocket. The early seasons make jokes about beepers. The mid-period seasons make jokes about early internet culture, dial-up, AOL Instant Messenger, the particular culture of early chat rooms and website design. Later seasons incorporate smartphones, then app culture, then social media, then streaming, then the specific anxieties of the algorithmic present. Each of these transitions is marked in the show's jokes, which function as a form of cultural carbon dating. You can place almost any Family Guy episode within a 3-year range just by noticing which technologies are treated as novel, which are treated as established, and which haven't yet appeared. What the cutaway gag encyclopedia reveals, taken in total, is something about memory. The show is built on the assumption that shared cultural memory is a form of intimacy, that referencing the right song from 1982, or the right tabloid story from 1994, or the right bit from a Saturday morning cartoon from 1969 will produce a feeling of recognition in the viewer that is briefly like being known. Not deeply known, but known in the specific way that you're known by someone who grew up watching the same television you watched. And there is comfort in that. Even at 2 a.m, even when you're half asleep, the right reference produces the right little flicker of familiarity. That's a lot of what the show has always been selling. Now let's talk about the times the show crossed from fiction into reality in ways that nobody intended, and that, in a few cases, caused real damage. Because Family Guy's relationship with the real world isn't always charming geographic specificity and affectionate celebrity tributes. Sometimes it's an episode getting pulled from the air, sometimes it's a lawsuit, sometimes it's a real tragedy landing on top of a cartoon joke in a way that makes everyone uncomfortable for years afterwards. The turban cowboy situation is the most dramatic example, and it's worth explaining in some detail. Turban Cowboy is a season 11 episode that aired on March 17th, 2013. In it, Peter takes up marathon running and befriends a Muslim character. There are various jokes in the episode, including a brief cutaway in which Peter is involved in a marathon explosion. The episode aired. People watched it. Some found it funny, some didn't, but it was a Family Guy episode, and it did what Family Guy episodes do. Then, on April 15th, 2013, 4 weeks after the episode aired, 2 bombs detonated near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. 3 people were killed. Hundreds were injured, many of them losing limbs. It was one of the most devastating domestic terrorist attacks in the United States in years. Fox pulled Turban Cowboy from Hulu and from streaming services almost immediately after the bombing. The episode was also removed from syndication. It has remained essentially unavailable through official channels ever since. In an era when almost everything is accessible somewhere, Turban Cowboy is one of those episodes that exists in a kind of quarantine. And the thing is, the episode's cutaway wasn't prescient in any meaningful sense. The show wasn't predicting anything. It was making a joke about marathon-related danger that is part of a long tradition of dark comedy about public events. But when reality lands on top of a comedy premise in that particular way, when the abstract becomes specific and the fictional becomes actual, the calculus changes completely. The joke doesn't become wrong necessarily, but it becomes impossible to watch for a very long time, maybe permanently. This is one of the starkest examples in television history of the real world reaching into a fictional text and changing its meaning irrevocably. The Parents Television Council is a real organisation, and its campaign against Family Guy is one of the more sustained, documented examples of advocacy group opposition to a specific television programme. The PTC, founded in 1995 by L. Brent Bozell III, spent years filing FCC complaints against the show, organising advertiser boycott campaigns, and releasing formal statements condemning specific episodes. They declared Family Guy Worst TV Show of the Week on at least 40 separate occasions. They targeted content involving religion, race, domestic violence, statutory rape, and what they described as indecent sexual content. None of this stopped the show. The FCC complaints largely went nowhere. The advertiser campaigns had limited effect. But the existence of this organised opposition is its own real-world story, a case study in how conservative media, watchdog organisations, engage with entertainment they dislike, and how those engagements have changed since the PTC was most active in the early 2000s. At the time, the PTC had real power to pressure advertisers. That era of advocacy has shifted considerably, but the record of it, all those worst TV show of the week citations, is a kind of historical document about a particular moment in American culture wars. The Carol Burnett lawsuit is legally significant enough to be worth examining carefully. Carol Burnett is a legendary American comedian and actress, best known for The Carol Burnett Show, a CBS variety program that ran from 1967 to 1978. One of her most recognizable characters from that show was the charwoman, a cleaning lady she played in comedy sketches, a gentle, shuffling figure in a kerchief and apron. Family Guy included a character styled after this charwoman in a season 5 cutaway. Burnett sued, arguing that the use of her character constituted an unauthorized appropriation of her likeness and persona. The case was dismissed by a federal judge under First Amendment protections for parody and satire. This was the correct legal outcome under existing copyright and parody law. The landmark Campbell versus Acuff Rose music case from 1994 had established substantial protections for parody, and the Family Guy usage was clearly transformative commentary rather than wholesale appropriation. But the fact that the case went to court at all, that a real lawsuit was filed, that real legal arguments were made, that a federal judge had to weigh in on a Family Guy cartoon, makes it one of the most tangible examples of the show's fictional world intersecting with real legal institutions. Art Matrano filed a separate lawsuit over a parody of his magic act in Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story. Also dismissed under fair use, the show generated multiple real legal actions, all of which ultimately vindicated the show's right to parody, but each of which took real lawyers, real filings, real judicial time to resolve. Partial Terms of Endearment is a season 9 episode about Lois becoming a surrogate mother for another couple, and it handles the subject of abortion directly and without the show's usual evasive comedy. Fox refused to air it in the United States. This was not a regulatory decision. The FCC didn't ban it. Fox, the network that airs the show, simply declined to broadcast it domestically. The episode aired in the United Kingdom and Canada. It was eventually released on DVD and became available through streaming. But for several years, an episode of an American television series was available to British and Canadian audiences, but not to American ones, because the American network found its subject matter too sensitive for its primary market. The Venezuela episode, a season 9 story about Brian's efforts to legalize marijuana in Quahog, was banned in Venezuela. The Venezuelan government, under Hugo Chavez, took exception to what they saw as the episode normalizing drug use. This is a real national broadcast ban of a cartoon episode by a real government. Family Guy got banned in Venezuela, not for the usual reasons a show gets banned, political satire, religious offense, obscenity, but for a storyline about a talking dog's weed legalization campaign. The WGA strikes are worth mentioning here as real-world events that left marks on the show's broadcast history. The 2007 to 2008 Writers Guild of America strike halted production across television. Fox aired 3 incomplete episodes of Family Guy during the strike without MacFarlane's final approval, without his voice, without the final sound mix, without his sign-off. MacFarlane publicly condemned this. He said it damaged his relationship with the network. Those episodes exist in the broadcast record in a form their creator never approved, which is its own strange kind of real-world interference in a fictional product. The 2023 WGA strike did the same thing on a larger scale. Production halted on May 12, 2023, when showrunners and MacFarlane walked off in solidarity with the striking writers. The show went dark for months. This is a real labour dispute with real stakes: health insurance, residuals, the impact of streaming revenue on writer compensation, the encroachment of AI writing tools. And it left a gap in the Family Guy broadcast schedule that viewers who were paying attention would have noticed. And then there's the show's relationship with Fox itself, which has always been a bit strange. Family Guy has been airing on Fox since 1999. Fox Corporation has been associated with various political positions that MacFarlane has publicly and persistently opposed. Fox News, which operates under the same corporate umbrella as Fox Broadcasting, is a regular target of Family Guy satire. The show has made direct, sometimes brutal jokes about Fox News' editorial approach over many years. MacFarlane has given interviews criticising the network his show airs on. The Arrangement, a programme using its platform to mock the platform it runs on, is one of the stranger ongoing institutional relationships in American television, and it has generated low-level controversy for years without ever quite resolving into an actual break. The show keeps airing, the jokes keep landing, the relationship keeps being strange. It's also worth noting that the show's approach to controversial content has not been static. The earlier seasons were considerably more willing to deploy certain kinds of shock humour than the later ones, and not entirely because of external pressure. Some of the shift reflects genuine recalibration. Jokes that played in 2001 read differently in 2015, and differently again in 2023, and the writers have, unevenly but perceptibly, adjusted. The show has gotten some things wrong over the years, in ways it has since, in some cases, acknowledged. The Cleveland Brown recasting in 2020, when Mike Henry stepped down and was replaced by Arif Zahir, with Henry saying publicly that people of colour should play characters of colour, is the clearest structural example of the show updating its practices in response to real-world shifts in how the culture thinks about representation. That's a real institutional change produced by real cultural pressure applied to a fictional character in a real writer's room. The IRL reference, again going all the way through, the AIDS-related controversy from the episode The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire, generated formal protests from AIDS service organisations over a specific cutaway. A group of real advocacy organisations issued a real statement condemning the show's treatment of AIDS. Real press releases were written. The show's writers almost certainly read those press releases and kept writing the same show. But the formal condemnation exists in the historical record of how the show interacted with advocacy communities in the early 2000s. The Brian Death and Resurrection arc is the most recent major real-world ripple, and it's different from all the others because it produced grief. Brian Griffin was hit by a car and killed in Season 12, Episode 6, Life of Brian, in November 2013. This was presented as a permanent death. The show got a replacement dog. People mourned. Not metaphorically mourned, actually mourned. Change.org petitions were filed. Thousands of signatures. Real media coverage of real people expressing real grief over the death of a fictional dog. Then 2 episodes later, in Christmas Guy, Stewie travels back in time and prevents Brian's death, and Brian is alive again. The petitions became irrelevant. The grief resolved. But what happened in the weeks between those 2 episodes is something that doesn't happen often in television. A character death that produced real grief at real scale. The show exploited that grief for ratings and attention, and then reversed it, which many people found frustrating, but the grief itself was real. And it says something interesting about how deeply embedded these characters had become in the emotional lives of people who had watched them for over a decade. Brian Griffin is not a real dog. Brian Griffin is not a real anything, but when he died, something really felt lost, even briefly, for quite a lot of people, and that is, in its own strange way, the most powerful real-world reference the show ever made, the moment when the fiction crossed into feeling. And now we've arrived at the section I'd wager most people who know Family Guy have the most opinions about. The predictions. The times the show made jokes about things that subsequently, in some form or another, came true. This is a well-worn territory in internet discussions of the show, so I want to try to be careful about it. Careful about what actually counts as a prediction versus what counts as satire bumping into eventual reality, and careful about what the interesting cases actually tell us about the show as a cultural object. The important caveat to get out of the way first: most predictions aren't predictions, they're satire. When you run a show for over 20 years that makes jokes about celebrities, politicians, technology, social trends, medical controversies, and current events, making hundreds of jokes per episode, thousands of jokes per season, tens of thousands of jokes total, a certain percentage of those jokes will eventually rhyme with reality just by sheer probability. The show doesn't have a crystal ball, it has an enormous archive of material and a culture that keeps generating events for that material to coincide with. That said, some of the coincidences are really striking. The Caitlyn Jenner case is probably the most well documented. In Season 8, which aired in 2010, a cutaway shows Bruce Jenner performing a feminine burlesque number at a televised event. The joke at the time was about Jenner's transition from 1970s Olympic golden boy to reality television adjunct, the cultural shift from athlete to Kardashian-adjacent celebrity. It was a joke about gender performance and celebrity culture. Then in Season 10, which aired in 2012, another bit revisits the observation. Jenner appears on a comedy stage in a feminine costume during a Wheaties mention. The joke references the Wheaties box, which was associated with Jenner's gold medal at the 1976 Montreal Olympics. In April 2015, Caitlyn Jenner publicly came out as a transgender woman in a televised interview with Diane Sawyer, and later in the Vanity Fair cover story. This was a significant cultural moment, the most high-profile public gender transition in American history up to that point. And immediately, people went back and found the Family Guy episodes and pointed out the Jenner jokes. 5 years of cutaways about Bruce Jenner's gender presentation suddenly looked, in retrospect, like they were tracking something real. Whether the writers knew something or were just making jokes about an aspect of Jenner's public presentation that was already visible to people paying close attention is unknowable. Both explanations are plausible. I don't think it's magic. But I understand why people find it striking. The Ellen DeGeneres situation is different because it's about professional conduct rather than personal identity, and the show's version of it is much more specific. In And I Am Joyce Kinney, Season 9, 2011, a cutaway depicts Ellen DeGeneres as a talk show host who continuously talks over her guests, barely letting them finish a sentence, maintaining a relentlessly positive and slightly suffocating on-camera persona, while the actual human beings she's interviewing quietly drown. At the time, this was a mild comedic observation. DeGeneres was enormously popular. The Ellen DeGeneres Show was one of the most watched daytime programs in America. The joke was muted. Then, during the COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020, a wave of allegations about the workplace culture at the Ellen DeGeneres Show became public. Former employees described a toxic environment characterized by cruelty, racial discrimination, and a significant gap between DeGeneres' public image as a kind, generous person and the reality of how she treated people who worked for her. The show's ratings collapsed. It ended in 2022, and that 2011 cutaway, the one where Ellen talks over everyone, self-absorbed and oblivious, suddenly read differently. Not as a prediction exactly, more as a satirical observation that turned out to be pointing at something real that the writers perhaps sensed without having evidence for. Good satire does that sometimes. It identifies a texture in a public figure that eventually resolves into something you can name. The Bitcoin reference is a simpler case of the show touching a cultural phenomenon before it became mainstream. In The Peanut Butter Kid, Season 12, approximately 2014, Peter offhandedly mentions investing in Bitcoin as a potential solution to the family's financial problems. Bitcoin had existed since 2009, but had not yet entered mainstream public consciousness in 2014 in the way it would later. Peter mentioning it as a casual investment idea, as if it's something a man like him would be vaguely aware of, is accurate to the way Bitcoin was circulating in certain corners of the internet at that time. Present, but not yet unavoidable. The subsequent decade made Bitcoin either a brilliant investment or a cautionary tale, depending on when you bought and when you sold. The show's early reference to it turns out to have been earlier than most of its viewers would have been aware of the concept. The Dick Cheney and Antonin Scalia reference we covered a bit in the history section, but it's worth revisiting here in the prediction context because it's one of the stranger ones. In Meet the Quagmires, Season 5, 2006, Death tells Peter that Dick Cheney has shot and killed Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. The Cheney hunting accident, the real one involving Harry Whittington, had just happened months earlier. The show was clearly riffing on that recent news event. The connection to Scalia was a joke about Cheney shooting someone important rather than just his friend. Scalia died in February 2016, 10 years later, in his sleep at a Texas ranch, not shot by anyone. But the specific pairing of Cheney plus Scalia plus Death in that 2006 episode has made it one of the most quoted Family Guy predicted it moments. The prediction isn't accurate. Cause of death is completely different. But the specific combination of those two real public figures and the word death landing in the same sentence did eventually become real, which is unsettling enough to note. The cannabis legalization storyline is a case where the show's prediction was correct in direction, if not in timeline. Brian, whether a cartoon dog's lobbying campaign deserves any credit for this is unclear, but the directional accuracy is real. The anti-vaccination storyline from Season 15 is worth its own moment. In Saturated Fat Guy, roughly 2016 to 2017, Peter becomes convinced by misinformation that a vaccine is harmful and spreads his fears throughout Quahog, leading to a small outbreak of a preventable disease. The episode handles the social dynamics of misinformation, how it spreads through communities, how it resists correction, how people who spread it are not necessarily malicious, but are really scared, with more accuracy than you'd expect from a show that was not particularly engaged with public health policy most of the time. Then COVID-19 arrived in 2020, and anti-vaccination sentiment became one of the dominant social phenomena of the next several years. The show's episode aired at a time when anti-vax movements were present but not yet mainstream. The cultural dynamic it described became, 4 years later, one of the defining political flashpoints of the pandemic era. Kevin Spacey is mentioned across several Family Guy cutaways over the years in ways that now read as pointed. Spacey, who was one of the most respected actors in Hollywood through the 1990s and 2000s, double Oscar winner, star of The Usual Suspects and American Beauty, was the subject of sexual misconduct allegations starting in October 2017, the same month that the Harvey Weinstein reporting broke and the broader Me Too movement began. Multiple men came forward with accounts of Spacey's behaviour over decades. His career effectively ended overnight. The Family Guy jokes that had referenced Spacey prior to 2017 in ways that hinted at open secrets about his behaviour acquired a very different meaning after October 2017. This is another case of satire tracking something that was known in certain circles but not yet public, and the jokes reading retrospectively as more informed than they seemed at broadcast. Robin Williams is handled more carefully and more sadly. Williams, who died in August 2014, had been referenced in Family Guy episodes over the years in ways that were affectionate rather than barbed. The show clearly admired his talent. After his death, which was ruled a suicide by asphyxiation and which led to the public disclosure of his Lewy body dementia diagnosis, some fans went back to earlier episodes and found references to Williams's mental health and emotional state that seemed to presage what happened. I think this particular one requires the most care, because the inclination to find patterns in the death of someone beloved is very human and very understandable, but it can also distort what was actually being said. Williams was publicly open about his struggles with depression and addiction for much of his career. The Family Guy jokes that touched on that darkness were engaging with what Williams himself had made public, not predicting anything specific. The Robin Williams case gets at something important about how the predictions framework works, and sometimes misleads. When something sad or surprising happens to a real person, audiences often go back through the cultural record looking for foreshadowing. This is a completely natural response. It's the mind trying to find pattern and meaning in randomness. But it can retroactively impose significance on jokes that were just jokes, made by writers who knew as much as everyone else at the time. The Family Guy writers are clever, and they pay attention, and they sometimes land on things that turn out to be true. They're also operating with the same information as the rest of us, most of the time. The smartwatch references are a smaller case, but worth noting as an example of the show tracking technology trends. Multiple cutaway gags in the late 2000s and early 2010s reference wrist-based computing, small personal devices, the idea of carrying information on your body rather than in your pocket. Apple released the Apple Watch in April 2015. The show's jokes about this technology preceded its mainstream arrival by several years, but they were tracking something that was already in development and already being discussed in technology circles. This is the predictions category that I'm least impressed by. The show was simply engaging with a conversation that was already happening among people paying attention to the tech industry. There is also the category of apparent predictions that look less impressive on closer inspection. Various cutaways have been cited as predicting Donald Trump's presidency. Trump was a public figure from the 1980s onwards who had publicly discussed running for president on multiple occasions before he actually did so. The Family Guy references to Trump as political figure in the mid-2000s were not predictions. They were jokes about a recurring cultural character who'd been making noises about entering politics for years. None of this is prescience. It's satire, tracking an obvious cultural story that eventually stopped being a joke. But there is a genuinely interesting subcategory of cases where the show identified specific social dynamics that were real but not yet publicly articulated, and those dynamics later became dominant. The anti-vaccination psychology material, the workplace culture observations about certain celebrities, the dynamics of misinformation in closed communities. These were all real and present in the social fabric when the show was depicting them. The writers didn't need to be psychic to see them. They needed to be attentive to social realities that were visible in certain professional and social circles before they became widely reported. Here's a broader point worth sitting with. Family Guy has been on the air for over 2 decades and has made tens of thousands of individual jokes and references. The probability that some of them rhyme with subsequent real events is not zero. It's not even low. A show that makes enough jokes about enough real subjects, sustained long enough, will produce coincidences that look like foresight in retrospect. The show's longevity is part of what creates the appearance of predictive power. The longer the archive, the more chances for apparent coincidence. What's worth holding on to isn't any individual prediction, but what the pattern reveals about how satire works, how it encodes knowledge that isn't yet publicly legible, and how humour can function as a kind of advanced journalism about things everyone half knows, but nobody's fully said yet. What I find most telling about the predictions taken together is what they reveal about the writer's room. a group of people who pay very close attention to celebrity culture, to politics, to social dynamics, to the conversations happening in certain professional and social circles, who think about those things obsessively enough to write jokes about them, will occasionally be ahead of the general public on developments that haven't fully surfaced yet. Open secrets are called open secrets because people within specific worlds know about them before they become public. The Family Guy writer's room was staffed by people embedded in entertainment, media, and popular culture. The things they knew about how celebrities really behaved, or how political figures were regarded by insiders, or which social movements were gaining momentum would have been somewhat ahead of general public knowledge. And that knowledge went into the jokes. Some of those jokes subsequently proved accurate. That's not magic. That's a room full of informed, perceptive people doing their jobs well. And now we've arrived at the section that, for me, is the most interesting one. Because everything we've talked about, the Rhode Island geography, the celebrity relationships, the historical references, the film parodies, the pop culture encyclopedia, the controversies, the predictions, all of it is connected, at its root, to one person. Seth Woodbury MacFarlane, born October 26, 1973, in Kent, Connecticut. And I want to spend some time on this because I think the show is more autobiographical than it's usually given credit for, and the IRL references go deeper than locations and celebrities. They go all the way down to the creator himself. The story starts, as I mentioned earlier, at the Rhode Island School of Design. MacFarlane arrived there in 1991, 17 years old, to study animation. RISD is a remarkable place, really one of the world's leading art and design schools, consistently producing working professionals in every creative field. It's in Providence, which, as we've covered, is the city that would eventually become Quahog. MacFarlane spent 4 years there, immersed in animation theory and practice and the cultural atmosphere of a New England college city in the early 1990s. He graduated in 1995. Before he left RISD, he had already made a short animated film. It was called The Life of Larry. The protagonist was a heavy-set, somewhat dim, but fundamentally good-natured man named Larry. Larry had a talking dog. The talking dog was arguably smarter and more neurotic than his owner. This short film is, if you squint at it, recognizably Family Guy. The DNA is all there. Same basic character dynamic, same general tone. MacFarlane was essentially working out what would become the show while still an undergraduate. The Life of Larry was good enough to get noticed. It led to a second short, Larry and Steve, which aired on Cartoon Network's What a Cartoon block in 1997. What a Cartoon was the incubator for a generation of animated series. Dexter's Laboratory, Cow and Chicken, Johnny Bravo, Courage the Cowardly Dog. All either came from or were adjacent to that program. Larry and Steve aired, was well received, and MacFarlane used it as his pitch material for the actual series. He made a 3-minute pilot to show Fox in the late 1990s. Fox ordered the show, and Family Guy premiered on January 31st, 1999, immediately following Super Bowl 33. Peter Griffin is Larry. Brian Griffin is Steve. The show that has been on television across its entire run is, in structural terms, the same short film that MacFarlane made in his final year at university. That's an extraordinary piece of creative consistency. Most creators evolve away from their initial ideas. MacFarlane took his original idea, refined it, scaled it up by every conceivable metric, and kept making the same fundamental story for decades. And there's a real-world version of that story, the show's own biography as a cancelled and revived programme. That is, in its own way, as strange and interesting as any of the IRL references inside the actual episodes. Family Guy premiered on Fox on January 31st, 1999, after Super Bowl 33, which gave it an enormous premiere audience. The ratings were good enough to secure a second season. Then they became inconsistent. Fox kept moving the show around in the schedule, placing it against increasingly popular competing programs, and the ratings suffered as a result. The show was cancelled at the end of Season 3 in 2002. The final episode of Season 3 didn't even air on Fox. The show was simply over. Then something happened that hadn't happened before. Fox sold the syndication rights to Cartoon Network for what the president of 20th Century Fox Television described as essentially nothing, a nominal sum. Cartoon Network began airing the episodes on their Adult Swim late-night block in April 2003. The response was immediate and dramatic. Family Guy became Adult Swim's highest-rated program. The late-night cable viewership was enormous for a show that Fox had dismissed as too small an audience to keep. At the same time, Fox released the first seasons on DVD. The set sold millions of copies. Family Guy became the best-selling television DVD of 2003. A show that Fox cancelled because nobody watched it became, within a year, the most watched thing on late-night cable and the best-selling TV DVD in the country. The audience had always been there. Fox had simply been scheduling the show against things like Malcolm in the Middle and American Idol, the dominant ratings powerhouses of their era, and wondering why it couldn't compete. The Adult Swim audience, watching at midnight rather than on Sunday night in prime time, was exactly the right audience in exactly the right context. In 2005, Fox ordered a new season of Family Guy. It became the first television series in American broadcast history to be revived by the same network that cancelled it, and to be revived based primarily on DVD sales rather than on traditional ratings or audience petition. That model, the cancelled show finding its audience on home video and cable syndication and coming back, has been cited in the industry many times since. It really changed how networks thought about the relationship between cancellation and audience discovery. Family Guy's real-world biography as a media object is one of the more remarkable IRL stories the show produced, and it happened entirely outside the show's fictional universe. And the North by North Quahog list of cancelled shows, all those real Fox casualties that Peter reads aloud in the revival episode's opening, is the show acknowledging all of this. It's MacFarlane saying, "I know what happened, I know what we were up against, I know the names of the shows that were prioritised over us." The list is a form of institutional memory, and it only works as a joke if you know the real history. Now, the Brian Griffin question, this is something that has been discussed by critics and fans for years, and I want to approach it carefully because I don't want to make claims MacFarlane hasn't made himself, but the circumstantial evidence is substantial. Brian Griffin, the dog, is the character most closely associated with MacFarlane's stated interests and sensibilities. Brian is a writer. Brian has literary ambitions. Brian is intelligent and frequently disappointed by the world's failure to take him seriously. Brian drinks martinis. Brian has complicated romantic relationships. Brian is politically liberal and vocal about it. Brian listens to jazz and classical music. Brian is also self-righteous, frequently insufferable, tends to lecture, and occasionally makes choices driven by ego rather than principle. MacFarlane also writes. MacFarlane also has literary ambitions. He's talked about wanting to be taken seriously as a creative force in ways that go beyond animated comedy. MacFarlane also drinks. MacFarlane is politically liberal and vocal about it. MacFarlane listens to jazz and classical music and has recorded orchestral albums of standards. MacFarlane is also occasionally accused of being self-righteous and prone to lecturing. I'm not saying Brian Griffin is a one-to-one self-portrait, but the character functions as something like MacFarlane's idealized self trapped inside an absurd situation, and the degree to which Brian is allowed to be correct about things while still being flawed is consistent with how a creator treats a character they're partly projecting onto. The real MacFarlane's musical career is worth dwelling on because it's such a direct expression of the part of himself he puts into Brian. In 2011, MacFarlane released Music is Better Than Words on Columbia Records. This was not a novelty comedy album. It was a genuine big band and orchestral standards album, Frank Sinatra territory, Mel Torme territory, the American songbook tradition, with arrangements by Joel McNeely and performances with a full orchestra. The album reached number 17 on the Billboard 200, which for a standards record in 2011 was a significant achievement. He performed at Carnegie Hall, he has appeared on Broadway, his Oscar hosting in 2013, which was controversial in various ways, included full musical numbers performed live with the orchestra. This musical identity runs straight into the show. The Walter Murphy orchestral score, the Sheep-Hoopy performances, the Broadway pastiche musical numbers, the jazz arrangements, all of this is MacFarlane's actual taste expressed through his show. He's not commissioning orchestral comedy music because he thinks it'll be funny. He's doing it because he really loves that music and wants it in the thing he's making. Brian's cultural interests are MacFarlane's cultural interests. The show's musical vocabulary is his musical vocabulary. And then there's September 11th, 2001. I've mentioned this already briefly, but it deserves its full moment because it's arguably the most significant real-world event in MacFarlane's biography, and its relationship to the show is complicated and profound. MacFarlane was booked on American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston Logan Airport on the morning of September 11th, 2001. His travel agent had given him the wrong departure time. He had been out late the night before and was slightly hungover. He arrived at Logan Airport after boarding had closed. The gate agent told him the flight had departed. He turned around and went back to the terminal. Flight 11 was the first plane to hit the World Trade Center's North Tower at 8:46 a.m. MacFarlane has been very public about this. He's discussed it in interviews and at public events. It is not a secret or a rumour. He missed his own death by between 10 and 15 minutes, depending on the account. This is a piece of biographical information that, once you know it, changes how you hear certain things about the show. Family Guy has a complicated, sometimes ugly, sometimes surprisingly sincere relationship with September 11th. There are cutaway gags that reference it that many people found inappropriate. There are episodes that engage with post-9/11 America, the wars, the political climate, the national anxiety, with varying degrees of seriousness. There is also a pattern in the show of characters cheating death, of deaths being reversed, of the universe's apparent finality being undone. Brian dying and coming back, characters in mortal peril routinely surviving, the constant resetting of the status quo. I'm not saying that pattern is directly caused by MacFarlane's near-death experience, but I am saying that a person who missed dying by 15 minutes would have a complicated relationship with mortality, and that relationship might well leak into the texture of the creative work they've been doing ever since. The show's first episode after September 11th was an episode that already existed, produced before the attacks, but the show's relationship with New York, with terrorism, with large-scale disaster, and with the specific comedy of dark subjects, has been shaped, I'd argue inevitably, by the fact that its creator had a personal, visceral, near-miss encounter with the event that defined the first decade of the 21st century. MacFarlane has said publicly that he has thought about it, that it affected him, that he found the random nature of his survival difficult to process. Those feelings don't disappear when you go back to the writer's room. MacFarlane's Harvard Lampoon connections are a more minor biographical note, but one worth including. The Lampoon is the famous Harvard University humor magazine and comedy society, and its alumni network runs through American comedy writing in ways that are occasionally comically self-referential. MacFarlane didn't attend Harvard, he went to RISD, but he had connections to that comedy writing ecosystem through his career development. The writer's room for Family Guy over the years included several people with Ivy League comedy backgrounds, which partly explains the show's specific blend of blue-collar subject matter, Peter's working-class life, the bar, the brewery, with the slightly arch-reference-heavy, culturally omnivorous humour that runs through the gags. Ted, which was released in 2012 and became one of the highest-grossing R-rated comedies ever made, is the clearest example of MacFarlane's feature film ambitions. A talking teddy bear, adult humour, a story about a man who never grew up. The film is essentially Family Guy's spiritual structure, absurd premise, real emotional stakes underneath, exported to a theatrical format and given a budget. Ted grossed over $500 million worldwide. Ted 2 followed in 2015. Both films feature the same kind of real-world celebrity and cultural referencing that the show does, but in a slightly different register, darker in some places, more nostalgic in others. A Million Ways to Die in the West 2014 was less successful but equally revealing. MacFarlane cast himself as the lead, not just as a voice but as a live-action protagonist, which was a significant step. He'd been a disembodied voice for over a decade. Playing a character on screen was a different kind of exposure. The film was set in the American West and engaged directly with Western genre conventions, real geography, real historical period, real genre history, in ways that echo how Family Guy engages with every other real-world reference it encounters. MacFarlane is drawn to taking established real-world forms and inverting or interrogating them from inside. His political views are embedded in the show in ways that are sometimes subtle and sometimes not subtle at all. MacFarlane is explicitly and vocally liberal, pro-environment, pro-LGBTQ rights, anti-gun, anti-organised religion. These positions run through the show's treatment of nearly every political subject it touches. The show's depiction of gun culture is rarely affectionate. Its treatment of Christianity is frequently mocking. Its support for gay rights has been present since early in the show's run. There are episodes from the early 2000s that were relatively progressive on same-sex relationships by the standards of network television at the time. Brian's atheism and political liberalism are not random character traits. They're MacFarlane's own positions in narrative form, which, when you think about it, is one of the more direct IRL references in the entire show, not a location or a celebrity or a historical event, but a person's actual beliefs about the world, running unedited through 2 decades of a primetime cartoon. When the show criticises Fox News, and it does repeatedly, sometimes quite brutally, there is a specific irony in that Family Guy has been on the Fox Broadcasting Company since 1999. Fox Broadcasting and Fox News are under the same corporate umbrella, but are not the same entity. The relationship between Family Guy and its network has always been tense in interesting ways. MacFarlane has used the show to criticise the politics of the broader media organisation it's broadcast on, which requires a certain kind of contractual audacity or a very understanding arrangement with the network's entertainment division. The show has also been self-referential about its own IRL status in ways that reward attention. In North by North Quahog, the first episode after the show's revival from cancellation in Season 4, 2005, Peter tells the family that they were cancelled because Fox needed to make room for a long list of other shows: Dark Angel, Titus, Undeclared, Action, Wonderfalls, Fastlane, Andy Richter. Controls the Universe, Firefly, and others. He reads this list aloud at length. Every single show on that list is a real show that Fox actually cancelled. The joke is real. The list is real. The show is acknowledging its own biography. The cancellation in 2002, the revival in 2005, by listing the actual competitors and stablemates that contributed to its initial ratings troubles. And then there's the COVID pandemic PSA, which is quite charming in a low-key way. In 2020, when vaccines became available and public health officials were trying to encourage uptake, the Family Guy production studio released a short animated piece, 3 minutes, featuring Peter, Stewie and Brian, explaining the science of how vaccines work. A cartoon that spends most of its time being irreverent and occasionally quite dark about medical subjects made a sincere public health announcement. MacFarlane is, despite the show's reputation for nihilism, someone who takes science seriously, and the willingness to do that PSA was consistent with his stated values. The podcast that ran during the COVID lockdowns, an in-character audio show featuring Brian and Stewie discussing life in self-isolation, is a small but interesting case of the show's fictional universe being deployed in response to a real-world event. Characters from a cartoon talking about the lockdown through the lens of their fictional relationship, in a format that was designed to be consumed by people who were stuck at home with too much time on their hands. It's a minor thing, but it's another example of the boundary between the real world and Quahog proving more permeable than it might appear. And perhaps the deepest IRL reference in the entire show, the one that is always there but never directly stated, is this. Seth MacFarlane has been making the same show for over 25 years. It has been renewed through season 28. He has been the voice of 4 main characters, Peter, Stewie, Brian and Quagmire, for over a quarter of a century. This is, by any measure, an extraordinary sustained creative commitment. Whatever the show's flaws and whatever the fluctuations in its quality over the decades, there is something real happening in the maintenance of that creative relationship. A man, his characters, his fictional town, and the audience that has been watching all of it since 1999. That's not nothing. That's a real long-term creative relationship. The kind of thing that leaves marks on everyone involved, the creator and the audience both. The voice work alone is worth pausing on, because it's easy to underestimate how demanding it is. MacFarlane performs 4 distinct, fully realised voices in every episode. Peter, the broad, slightly breathless, fundamentally well-meaning incompetent. Stewie, the clipped, theatrical, English-accented baby prodigy. Brian, the smooth, slightly weary, martini-dry literary dog. Quagmire, the almost vaudevillian, borderline disturbing bachelor neighbour. Each of these has been consistent across hundreds of episodes. The voice of Stewie in Season 1 and the voice of Stewie in Season 20 are recognisably the same character, evolved slightly in terms of emotional range and comic timing, but continuous. That continuity is a real achievement of performance craft, and it often goes unacknowledged because animated voice work tends to be invisible in a way that on-screen performance isn't. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, has been doing the same. Seth Green, who voices Chris. Mila Kunis, who has voiced Meg since Season 2. These are actors who have spent decades inside a single character, and the texture of those characters, the way Lois's patience has certain identifiable limits, the way Chris's obliviousness is always more endearing than Peter's, the specific register of Meg's resigned suffering, is built across hundreds of cumulative performances. The show's character consistency isn't just a writing function, it's a performance function. Real people coming back, again and again, to the same fictional voices. And the show's real-world impact on the medium itself deserves a moment, because it is considerable. Family Guy didn't invent the cutaway gag, but it popularised it as a sustained structural device in animated sitcoms to a degree that permanently changed the form. American Dad, Bob's Burgers, Archer, and dozens of other shows that came after carry traces of what Family Guy established. The willingness to break narrative for a self-contained joke, to privilege cultural reference over plot momentum, to treat an episode's main story as almost incidental to the parade of cultural observations it enables, that's a formal choice that Family Guy made central and that the medium has been living with ever since. The DVD revival model, which I mentioned in the context of the show's own cancellation story, had real industry consequences. When Family Guy came back on the basis of DVD sales and cable syndication ratings rather than traditional network measurements, it demonstrated that an audience existed for a program that conventional ratings methods were failing to capture. That demonstration mattered to how networks and studios thought about the relationship between content and audience discovery. The streaming era, with its own questions about how to measure who is actually watching what, is in some structural sense the continuation of the same conversation that Family Guy's revival started in 2004 and 2005. The show has also generated real academic attention. There are media studies papers about its use of parody and intertextuality. There are cultural analysis pieces about its relationship with American working class identity. There are communication studies using it as a case study in how animated comedy engages with political satire. A cartoon about a fat man in Rhode Island has accumulated a real body of scholarly literature, which is either a testament to how much there is to say about it, or an indication of what happens when academic institutions run out of other things to analyse. Possibly both. None of this is in the show exactly, but all of it is the real-world record of what the show produced. The actual documented impact it left on real institutions, real industries, real creative practices. The IRL reference isn't always a joke. Sometimes it's a consequence. And there's one last real-world thing I want to name before we move to the closing, which is the audience itself. The people who have been watching Family Guy since 1999 are now in their 30s, 40s and 50s. The teenagers who discovered it on Adult Swim in 2003 are adults with their own teenagers now. The people who bought those DVD sets are watching the show on streaming services with their children. The cultural memory the show encoded in its early seasons, the Brady Bunch, the 1980s songs, the specific tabloid stories of the mid-1990s, is now really historical for a portion of its current audience. What was nostalgia for the original viewers is archaeology for newer ones. That generational shift is real. The show's relationship with its own archive and the changing relationship between the show and whoever is watching it at any given moment is itself a kind of ongoing IRL reference. The show keeps aging, the audience keeps changing, and Quahog stays the same. That's the deal, which might be the most honest IRL reference in Family Guy. Not any single joke or historical moment or celebrity cameo, but the simple fact that it has lasted this long and that people keep watching and that Quahog is still out there. So that's where I'll leave it tonight. 8 categories of real things embedded in a very fake cartoon. Real geography, real people, real history, real films, real pop culture, real controversies, real predictions, and a real person whose life runs through all of it like a thread. What I keep coming back to, sitting here thinking about all of this, is how odd it is that a show with such a reputation for being unanchored, chaotic, random, consequence-free, is actually this deeply tethered to the real world. Every time you think you're watching pure absurdity, there's usually something real underneath it. A real city, a real song, a real event that the writers were paying attention to, a real person who showed up and decided to be in it. And I think that's part of why the show has lasted as long as it has. Not the individual jokes, plenty of those haven't aged particularly well, but the underlying commitment to engagement with reality. The show keeps talking to the world keeps changing, and every few years one of the jokes the show made turns out to have been pointing at something true. Not because of magic, just because attentive, funny, well-informed people spent a long time looking at the same world we all live in and writing down what they saw. There's a version of this conversation where I focus only on the charming bits. The Providence skyline in the background, Nibbles Woodaway on his perch above the highway, the modern diner that became the nifty 50s diner, the Breakers estate standing in for Cherrywood Manor. Those details are the loveliest parts of this whole thing. They're the show at its most affectionate. A young man from art school in New England building his hometown into a cartoon and trusting that it would mean something to people who'd never been there. And it did. And it does. But there's also the harder version, the turban cowboy gap in the broadcast record. The Carol Burnett lawsuit that had to go to federal court before it resolved. The workers who walked off the production and didn't get to come back for months. The real people who were depicted as versions of themselves that they may or may not have found flattering. The real grief that built up during 2 weeks in November 2013 when a cartoon dog was dead, and somehow that mattered. All of that is the IRL record too. The show isn't just a lovingly assembled archive of American popular culture, it's also an object that has had real effects in the real world, that has changed how people think about parody law, that has influenced labour negotiations, that has been pulled off the air in the aftermath of a real bombing. The fiction and the reality have been in constant conversation all this time, and that conversation has not always been comfortable. But I think that's what makes it interesting. Safe Art doesn't have a Turban Cowboy episode. Safe Art doesn't get cancelled and come back. Safe Art doesn't generate real lawsuits and real grief and real government bans in real countries. Family Guy has been, whatever else it is, a show that has consistently rubbed up against reality in ways that left marks on the show, on the culture, and occasionally on specific real people and real events that ended up in its orbit. There's a reason people who loved it as teenagers still go back to it now, not always because the specific jokes hold up, some of them very much do not, but because the texture of it is familiar in the way that a neighbourhood you grew up in is familiar. The streets are the same, the buildings are recognisable, you know where everything is. Quahog is that neighbourhood for a lot of people. And the fact that it's built from real places and real songs and real memories, from a real city and a real art student's real childhood and a real person's real near miss with death, all of that makes the familiarity feel earned rather than manufactured. You're not just recognising a cartoon, you're recognising a specific version of the world that someone took the trouble to build carefully and keep building. Now for future videos, there's a lot I didn't get to tonight that I really want to cover. The show's relationship with music deserves its own full exploration, not just the musical numbers and the real songs licensed for cutaways, but the whole question of what it means that MacFarlane built a show with a full orchestral score in the tradition of Golden Age Hollywood film music, at a time when most animated comedy was using much cheaper and simpler musical approaches. Walter Murphy is worth a proper conversation. The Quagmire character is another one I've been circling. Glenn Quagmire's backstory, when you dig into it across the seasons, turns out to be surprisingly specific about real naval culture, real aviation culture, real mid-century bachelor culture. There are episodes that flesh out his history in ways that reward attention from anyone who knows anything about those worlds. I'd also like to do something eventually about the specific history of the show's cancellation and revival. The full story of what happened between 2002 and 2005, the Adult Swim ratings, the DVD sales, and what that particular chapter means in the broader history of American television. It's a real story about real business decisions and real audience behaviour that changed how the industry thinks about viewer loyalty. It deserves more than the brief treatment I gave it tonight. But those are future conversations. For now, I hope this was a comfortable couple of hours. Quahog is still out there in its fictional Rhode Island with the real Providence skyline in the background. Peter is still at the Pawtucket Brewery. Brian is still working on a novel that may or may not ever get finished. Stewie is still several decades ahead of everyone else in the room. And Nibbles Woodaway is still on the roof of New England Pest Control. 58 feet of blue fiberglass termite keeping watch over the highway. Exactly where he's always been. That's Quahog for you. Built from real things, containing real things. Still there. Sweet dreams. Until next time.